New York, 1904. Firefighters rush to a call and see smoke coming from behind the door. Pressing his palm against the door, one of the firefighters expects to feel a high temperature, but his hand freezes. After tearing it off, they break down the door and find people inside. Frozen, they sit at the table as if they just had lunch, and a second later they shatter into tiny pieces. Our days. Ghostbusters rush through the city in pursuit of a ghostly dragon. Driver is Gary, with her girlfriend Callie, with her 2 kids. Phoebe, the youngest of the Ghostbusters, snags it with her beam, but the dragon flies higher and the trap is out of range. The mother Ghostbuster, Callie, launches a trap drone that catches the ghost at high altitude. Mission accomplished. However, the city has been damaged and the mayor wants to shut the whole thing down. Also, Phoebe is a minor, which means she should not be working as anyone. Next, we see former Ghostbuster and current YouTube channel host, Professor Ray Stentz. On air, he identifies ghosts in various items brought in by the channel's guests. After the session is over, his intern, Podcast, smashes the thing with a sledgehammer to increase the number of views. Phoebe brings them the next portion of the ghost's cytoplasm from the last hunt. The intern takes the guest to the basement, where she sees a large number of small creatures, marshmallow men. Just then, a new visitor crosses the threshold upstairs. He brings a box of wonderful junk and offers to Professor to buy it. In the box, among other junk, turns out to be a metal ball with hieroglyphics. It was that metal sphere in the room with the frozen people in 1904, and it was in it that the professor recognized a trap for dark forces. Ray tries to measure the orb with a device, hoping to detect the presence of otherworldly forces in it. It turns out that there are so many of them that the device goes off the scale, and the cold line extends across the floor all the way to the Ghostbusters' shelter. It reaches the ghost vault and shakes it with huge tremors. One of the Ghostbusters, a friend of Gary's, is extremely concerned about the condition of the vault as it has never been unloaded, which means it must have been filled to capacity for a long time. Around this time, Trevor notices a leak in the ceiling of his room. But it's not water dripping, it's cytoplasm. After telling his mother about the find, he is offered the chance to find out for himself, as he is already 18 years old. Trevor takes the trap and climbs up to the attic. He finds a pile of garbage with a green ghost hiding underneath. Slimer, a permanent character in the traditional Ghostbusters. But dealing with the ghost is not something Trevor has time for. A signal is received, and now all the Ghostbusters except Phoebe jump into their car and rush to the call. Left alone, Phoebe sits down in the yard to play chess, but the enemy pieces begin to move on their own. Phoebe tries not to pay attention until the player appears in front of her. A ghost named Melody disappears after meeting and chatting with Phoebe. Afterwards, we see Ghostbusters and a bioengineer approaching the vault, saying that it is full and needs to be emptied. Next, the Ghostbusters are taken to the new Anomaly Center, where they are shown all the improvements in the new vault. The reboot from old to new should take about 6 years. The new center houses many of the possessed items shared by Ray Stentz, including a strange orb with hieroglyphics on it, and then another call for the Ghostbusters, and Phoebe is alone again. Later, however, she receives another call, so she decides to go there herself, accompanied by Podcast. Meanwhile, at the new center, a bioengineer is pulling ghosts out of possessed things and loading them into the vault. The metal sphere is next, but instead of pulling out the ghost, the power goes out. All the protective barriers holding back the ghosts are knocked out. The backup generator kicks in just before all the ghosts escape. The engineer decides to pull the orb out of the machine, but his hand freezes. He barely frees himself, and the orb falls to the floor, breaking through the concrete. On the call, Phoebe and Podcast do see a ghost in the cafe. The girl recognizes a new friend, Melody. She deliberately shoots past her to let her escape. At home, she sees Melody outside the window and invites her in. Their conversation is interrupted by Mom, and the ghost disappears. We learn that Melody, after meeting Phoebe, pursues some goal, and she is led by someone from the metal sphere. Later, the bioengineer and Trevor pay a visit to the cellar of the sphere. He turns out to be the grandson of the deceased grandmother, in whose closet the sphere was kept along with the rest of the strange artifacts. Measuring the presence of an abnormal entity in the room, the guys point it at the grandson and the device starts beeping. His name is Nadim and he doesn't understand a word. Nadim is taken to the center to be examined. Meanwhile, Phoebe, intern Podcast, and Ray watch a videotape of the orb and hear ancient language coming from it. They undertake to find out what exactly the orb says. At the Anomaly Research Center, Nadim is strapped with equipment, and Professor Peter Venkman, another of the first group of ghost hunters, starts asking him all kinds of questions. Time after time, he throws a pen at the guy and watching him get angry. The rest of the team also watches his anger, as well as at the flame of the burner, which intensifies significantly when Nadim is at the peak of anger and irritation. frozen. Phoebe, Podcast, and Ray make it to the library, where Ray's acquaintance hears the whole story from them about the orb, the voice, and how that voice commands all the ghosts at their center. The librarian shows them ancient cave paintings that depict their sphere. He says that once a genie, Garaka, was imprisoned in it, whose owner suspected him of encroaching on his throne. The Flame Masters imprisoned the genie in a dungeon, in the form of an iron orb. The librarian also said that later in the 19th century, he was freed by a special spell, but something didn't go according to plan, and this time a whole room full of people was frozen. A man set an antique wax cylinder to play. The same ancient speech is heard from the old gramophone, but a moment later, the cylinder with the spell is stolen by a poltergeist, an anomalous entity from the center, probably sent by a genie from the sphere. The Ghostbusters give chase, and then we see the scene from the original 1984 movie, when Ray, running past the bookshelves, notices the ghost of an old maid. She first gestures for silence, and a moment later, transforming into a fearsome demon, rushes at the professor. Running out onto the library porch, guys try to find the escaped poltergeist, but it finds them on its own. By inhabiting in a statue of a lion, it approaches the professor. Phoebe and Podcast find a proton weapon in their motorcycle, and Phoebe shoots the statue. Having shattered into concrete fragments, the statue litters the approaching police cars with its remains. The entire team is brought to the mayor's office. He fires the entire team and shuts down the Ghostbuster organization itself. Back at the base, the team stumbles upon a large lock on the door. Despite the fact that Callie and Gary scolded Phoebe for her arbitrariness, now only she was able to open the lock and let everyone home. However, the inside appeared empty. All equipment, including guns, traps, proton packs, etc., were confiscated. At that moment, Trevor and the bioengineer return from the center. With them comes a seemingly possessed Nadim. Everyone realizes that their activities in this town are over, but Gary isn't ready to give up and suggests that Kelly fight for her rights. After all, the townspeople will have no one to turn to if they all leave. Everyone forgot about Nadim, who went down to the basement and saw the frozen vault that the bioengineer was studying at the time. When asked what had happened, the engineer implied that everything would have been fine if someone hadn't touched the orb from Grandma's pantry. Nadim's objections were interrupted by Ray, who told the boy that his grandmother was the Fire Master. She kept the world safe from evil, and now the power has passed to her grandson. Ray tries to convince the boy that he has a gift. He puts a candle and a lit lighter in front of him. He asks the man to light the candle. When he sees that the flame of the lighter obeys him, he tells everyone that they will all die soon. After all, he is a loser in life, and nobody can rely on him. Meanwhile, Gary stands in front of Phoebe's locked door and tells her that he's sorry, that life is unpredictable and all that. The girl doesn't really hear him because she's outside with Melody. They talk, and Phoebe is amazed that only a ghost can understand her. And what a pity that she and Melody are in different dimensions. And after a minute, Phoebe gets an idea in her head about how she can temporarily become a ghost. Melody's pleas to give up this madness do not stop the girl. They go to the Anomaly Research Center, where Melody sees a metal sphere. Meanwhile, Phoebe gets into the ionic separator and starts the machine. Her spirit separates from her body, and already Phoebe's ghost is standing next to her body and smiling at Melody. They have 2 minutes to talk, but Melody isn't happy at all. She apologizes to Phoebe. Immediately, Phoebe's ghost is taken over by Garaka. Melody explains a genie can open a portal to the other side, but Garaka needs a living person to read the spell. Through Phoebe's spirit, he forces her body to speak the words of the spell. Melody explains that once the portal opens, she will be able to see her dead parents again. She apologizes again, and then everything goes dark. Garaka escapes from his prison. At this point, 2 minutes passes and Phoebe's spirit returns to her body. The girl gets to her feet and sees the genie standing nearby with a gun pointed at him by one of the center's employees. But the proton beams do no damage to Garaka. He freezes the beam, and with it, the employee herself, along with her proton pack. Fortunately, it's not fatal, and the girl thaws out a little later and comes to her senses. Meanwhile, the genie visits the deceased Flame Master's apartment and retrieves his horns from the pantry. After sticking them into his head, he takes on his former appearance and becomes just as deadly as in the old days. All that remains is to enter the Ghostbusters vault and free all the ghosts. Then he'll have an army of ghosts. And in the city, the cataclysms had already begun. In midsummer, everything is covered with ice, and ice poles are falling from the sky. The entire team of Ghostbusters, including all the old staff, an intern, a bioengineer, and a female staff member from the center, go on a big hunt. Since the ghost did not react to proton beams, they decided to use bronze. After all, the orb in which the ancient god languished was made of bronze. Trevor and his colleague positioned themselves on the roof to monitor the situation. They were the ones who noticed the poltergeist manifestations. A 3-wheeled child's bicycle without a rider rolled toward the building. Everyone is ready, but only the grandson, who managed to light the candles, sits modestly in his seat. He doesn't look like the Flame Master, but the others ask him to keep practicing. Meanwhile, a poltergeist breaks into the base and wreaks havoc, but the team manages to avoid injury and damage. At some point, an unseen force snatched the gun from the hunter and pointed it at Trevor. After a moment, the proton stream darted at the guy, but Nadim was right next to him. He seized the beam with his force and directed it away, while 4Podcast smashed the proton pack with a sledgehammer and disabling the weapon. The poltergeist left the gun and dove into the pizza, which was eaten a second later by a green lizard that appeared. Meanwhile, Phoebe goes down to the basement. There, Melody is standing in front of the vault. Pointing the gun at her, Phoebe wonders if anything in their communication was true. It turns out that there is nothing but a fair win in chess, and it's too late to fix the situation because the ghost girl senses that Garaka is already here. And indeed, we see him at the base gate. The proton beams were useless, of course. The demon simply froze them, but then Nadim stepped forward. He put on his bronze armor and tried to scare the genie away with the flame of the lighter. However, the lighter ran out of gas, so the plan immediately failed before it could begin. The genie casts a spell and the vault cracks at the seams. The ghosts break free. Garaka freezes the whole team and binds them with ice. But Phoebe's backpack and weapon are different. Earlier, she had melted bronze and dipped all the parts of her equipment in the alloy. The beam of her weapon is much more powerful now, and it's not so easy for the genie to resist it. However, he succeeds and freezes the girl. This seems to be the end of the confrontation, but we see Melody. She lights a match, and the flame is picked up by Nadim. He launches a fireball at the ancient god, and the heat wave thaws the entire team. Phoebe fires her proton pack at him again. Together with the Fire Master's fire beam, she manages to lock Garaka in place. All that remains is to trap him. An intern comes to the aid. He launches a drone trap, but the genie swats it away like an annoying fly. A bigger trap is needed to catch him. Ray comes up with the idea of using the vault itself as a trap. Having launched it, the team draws the evil spirit inside. When it's over, Phoebe sees Melody's ghost dissolve and fly off into space. Her work in this reality is done, and the city is warm again. The ice has melted, and the people cheer for the team of Ghostbusters for saving the whole city. Ovations, cameras, reporters force the mayor, who is opposed to them, to recognize their achievements. A green Slimer with a dragon flies out of the base. The Ghostbusters have work again. Callie throws Trevor the car keys, and Gary is a little stunned because this is the first time Phoebe has called him dad.